All right, so should we give a couple more minutes to see if other members join?
Yeah, let's give 2 minutes.
Okay.
And if we don't have any, we'll move right into the agenda, but of course it can't be, won't be able to approve things, so.
Got it.
I'd say we could go anytime.
Okay. All right, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April 14th Tree and Stormwater Advisory Board meeting. So we don't have a quorum today, so basically we're just gonna go through the agenda as Guy mentioned, with no votes on approving minutes from last January's meeting. So with that being said, we'll open it up for public comments. If anybody from the public is present and would wish to ask comments, or Guy, if you've received any comments from the public at large through email or any form of communications.
I see none.
Okay. All right, so we'll move ahead to the next item on the agenda, which is the Urban Forest Management Plan. Looks like we have a guest tonight to go over some of the packet information that was sent out earlier. So Guy, if you, I guess Andrew Larson is our guest tonight. So I'll just hand it over to Andrew if you would like to introduce yourself and give us a little bit of overview on your position, and go right ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So like you said, my name is Andrew Larson. I am an urban forester and certified arborist that works for JEO Consulting Group. So JEO Consulting Group is an engineering, architecture, and environmental consulting firm. And we do work in Nebraska and Iowa. This contract was actually in a partnership with the Iowa DNR. So we worked for the DNR to provide this service for communities throughout Iowa. And so North Liberty just happened to be one of them. I'm going to actually just run through a few notes, a few things that I wanted to highlight from the actual urban forest management plan. And I have a little presentation that I put together that I thought would be helpful for kind of just running through all of the items. I had this up, but it just crashed, so I got to pull it up here real quick, if you don't mind. And then I will just share my screen and go through it. And then at the end of it, if you guys have any questions, I'm here just to kind of go over things and help out any way that I can. So let's see here if I can pull it up here. Don't want to have too many tabs open. All right, I'm going to share my screen now. All right. Okay, of course, okay. All right, so just as sort of an intro, so myself and my coworker Morgan Langer, also an urban forester, we came to North Liberty and conducted a tree inventory in the summer of 2020. So that mostly involved just walking from tree to tree on public or city-owned property and doing a visual assessment of each of those trees, taking specific points of data and then using that data later on to write this management plan. And I'll go into a little bit about what those different data points were here in a little bit. So I already introduced myself, so I don't have to do that again, and introduce JO. So just a few objectives of the plan. So overall, it's just to assist you with managing your urban forest, kind of having a game plan moving forward. Also just to inform you on the benefits of a healthy urban forest and the benefits that your tree specifically provide to you, both in dollar amount and also in things you can't see. So like air quality, water quality, things like that. And obviously, since you have a tree and stormwater advisory board, those sorts of things are important to your city. So also we just want to help establish preventative treatment for emerald ash borer. And if emerald ash borer is already present, really working on sort of a proactive plan for removing and replacing those ash trees before they become a huge problem that's costly and dangerous. And then we also, we like to help cities develop an efficient tree management technique. This looks different for every community. Your community has a large amount of trees relative to its size. And so that, means that your techniques for doing pruning on all of your trees is going to vary from a city that only has 300 trees. And then we also just are identifying trees that were public safety issues, and those were also highlighted in the management plan. So one, why does it matter? You're probably all going to be pretty familiar with these reasons, but number one, the DNR likes to have these tree inventories and management plans performed to help cities combat and plan for emerald ash borer related issues. They can become extremely costly if you have a large number of standing dead trees due to an emerald ash borer infestation, and it can be really dangerous. Number two, healthy urban landscapes promote healthier communities. So the more trees you have is great, but if those trees are healthy, that's even better. So working on ways to just promote better tree care from when they're young, when they're planted, so that you have more benefits in the future. And then I just said this, so sound management practice on your trees can increase those environmental benefits. So really putting in the time and money early on in a tree's life will really be worth it in the long run. So about the data that we collected, so every tree had collected or information collected about that tree itself and the surrounding area. So not only did we look at the tree, we looked at if there was a sidewalk running by that tree. Is that sidewalk damaged? We looked at power lines. Are power lines interfering with the trees? And then specific information about the tree, obviously species. We also took information on the diameter at breast height. So just using that to classify sort of the age structure of your forest, your urban forest. We also took information that was related to the health of the tree. So both wood and leaf health, and additional data about the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer and a few other pests and diseases that are maybe not common, but do occur in Iowa. And so we used just a GPS data collector paired with an iPad. So if you saw us walking around town, that's all we need. We're pretty mobile, and we're just bouncing from tree to tree. All right, so now we'll kind of get into some of the results. So I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. So feel free to stop me or raise your hand if you want to with the little hand raising thing here on Zoom, and I'll stop and I can answer any questions just because there's a lot of numbers and information. So overall, North Liberty's trees are providing $156,358 of benefits annually. So this is estimated using the data that we collected, and which is put into a software developed by the U.S. Forest Service called iTree Streets. And so that averages a species for the region that we are located in, and also their size and health qualifications to come to these different dollar values. So it's a pretty cool software and can kind of give you a representation in dollar amounts about what your trees are actually giving to your community. On average, it's around $101.86 per tree. There are over 33 species of trees present, and that's around 1,000, or that is 1,535 public trees altogether in the inventory. And so the most common tree genre were maple at 24.5%, apple, generally mostly crab apple, and oak at 15%. So we like to look at these common tree genre just because it's important to identify what you have the most of to understand whether or not you should be planting these species, these genre of tree anymore. So one note that I would take away from this is that avoiding maple might be a good option at this time. Everyone is planting maple trees in the same fashion that we planted elm trees about 30-40 years ago, and about 20-25 years ago planting ash trees. So we don't want to see that continued cycle where we are planting an abundance of a specific genre of tree and then some invasive pest comes in and kills them all. So we're really encouraging people, if they have large amounts of maple trees, especially soft maple, silver maple, sugar maple, those sorts of trees typically don't do as well in urban landscapes, and there are better options. Generally, we like to see certain genres under 20% and certain species under 15%. And now, granted, having a specific species at 15% is pretty high, but in some cities that is sort of hard to manage. So yeah, overall doing pretty well. Really only one genre that's above 20%, and that is maple. And 30% of trees need some sort of management, and I'll touch on all of those types of management here in a second based off of our assessment of each of the trees. And then there were 90 trees recommended for removal, which compared to the total number of trees is a pretty good number. We saw several trees, especially after the derecho, or several cities, especially after the derecho event, see very large amounts of trees needing removal. And if I had to guess, you've already removed a number of these trees that we recommended for removal, just because of the time that has passed since we did the tree inventory. All right. So some people care about this, some people don't. I like to just briefly touch on the signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer, and just things that you can be looking for as an advisory board. I'm sure that you guys are caring and are looking and keeping an eye on your city's trees. So really looking at your ash trees specifically and those knowing where those locations are, and sort of just keeping an eye on them from year to year is super important. So one of the things you can be looking for is canopy dieback right at the top of the canopy, and that will eventually work its way down the tree, and you'll have bare branches with no leaves. So that throughout an infestation, that eventually works its way down the tree until basically there's just a mass around where the tree trunk starts to branch out. And that's just part of what happens when there's an infestation. Another thing you could see along with an infestation is bark splitting. So that's just occurring because of the large amount of larvae and eggs that have been laid under the bark, and that are feeding and moving around on the tree. The other thing you could see is the growth of water sprouts. So water sprouts are a symptom correlated with stress in a tree. A lot of trees grow these sprouts. They're kind of upward growing, green looking branch. Some people call them water sprouts. Some people call them epicormic shoots. They're growing out of areas where there shouldn't be branches growing out. They're sort of defying gravity and don't look normal or healthy. Another tree that commonly does this is crabapple, and they commonly have borers inside them as well. But this is a symptom that tells someone that the tree is stressed. Something you could see is D-shaped exit holes. This is a sure sign that you have emerald ash borer, specifically in ash trees. So it's you can see an example in that bottom right-hand corner. It's pretty distinguishable from other borer holes because of its capital D-shaped form. And that just has to do with the biology and the mandible and the makeup of the emerald ash borer. It just leaves that signature mark when it is exiting the tree. Another thing you could see in late May, early June, when those maturing adults are leaving the tree, they do feed on leaves, specifically ash tree leaves, as they're looking to mate and move to other trees. So you could see that. Not a great sign, but just another thing to look for. And then obviously S-shaped galleries beneath the bark. So if it's gotten to this point, you're probably going to assume that it's an emerald ash borer infestation. If you're able to see under the bark and see the S-shaped galleries, just the sort of back and forth squiggly line is a really easy way to describe it, where the eggs have been laid and then those larvae are moving around under the bark. And then last but not least, just seeing the actual emerald ash borer. They're metallic green in appearance. They really don't look like anything else in our region. So they're pretty easy to identify and distinguish. They're about dime sized, and you really can't mistake them for anything else. Okay, so now we'll get to some management needs. So overall, this is just going to break down the different types of management recommendation that we have made based off of our visual inspection of each of your trees. And then I'll just break down kind of what each of those things mean. So first, crown cleaning. Crown cleaning is one of the most common recommendations that arborists will give to tree owners, tree managers. And basically that just involves the thinning of certain branches throughout the canopy. This just helps with allowing more airflow within the canopy. This sort of lightens the load. So if you remove some of these branches, these heavier branches throughout the tree, possibly dead or diseased looking branches, then you're less likely to have an amount of damage during a high wind event or a storm or ice storm. And just by removing these proactively, you're going to have less dropped limbs and overall just a healthier structure of a tree. And so this isn't as important as I would say some of the other management recommendations are in priority, but definitely something to look into and continue doing. Next would be crown reduction. So we had 115 trees recommended for this. And a crown reduction generally is recommended when a tree is really close to a building or a power line, something where the tree is kind of growing into infrastructure. And overall, you're just going to be making the entire size of the crown smaller. I really don't like to recommend this for a lot of trees unless there's a serious need. Sometimes like power companies will come in and top trees. This isn't necessarily that. This is just shrinking the overall size of the crown. Trees typically respond better to this than they would a complete topping where you're removing the entire leader branches on the tree. And then it just loses its form and its value as a tree. People don't really like to look at them, and they typically die just because of exposure to the sun, etc. Next thing would be tree removal, which is pretty basic. I don't have a diagram for that. It's just kind of what it says. We recommend 90 trees be removed. And we really only recommend that those trees be removed because we saw some sort of safety or health concern with those trees. We generally don't take those removal recommendations lightly. So typically these are in high traffic areas or areas where there could be lots of cars parked underneath them, and ultimately just need to be taken down. Next thing would be crown raising. So this is a little less common and typically is occurring on trees that are planted along streets, and really is just to increase the amount of clearance under the lowest branch. So just removing those lower branches so that you can have more clearance for cars and pedestrians, etc. And then lastly, tree staking. So I personally don't always recommend staking young trees, only if they're in a high wind situation or a high traffic area where you have a lot of people or say kids in a park that like to break off sticks and pull on trees. If that's the case, then staking is an awesome option. But if you can not stake a tree and get away with it and it's structurally sound, then the tree is going to be healthier because of that. It's going to allow it to, be more durable during storms and grow more naturally, as opposed to having the staking sort of limit its growth. And sometimes staking can actually damage the tree in the long run. So it really depends on the scenario. Personally, in my own yard, I have 2 trees staked on one side of the house where I get a lot of wind, and on the other side of the house where I get no wind. I don't have those trees staked because they're strong enough and they're going to be better. I don't have to keep monitoring and loosening the braces and messing with them. So that concludes the management needs. So now I'll just kind of get into the annual benefits, and then we'll sort of just wrap things up. So overall, your trees reduce energy-related costs by $43,432. So I'm sure this would be something that's important to the group, as well as a few others that I'm going to touch on. But your trees are slowing wind. Your trees are shading buildings, and so all of that, blocking the wind and creating more shade for buildings is really reducing the amount of money and energy usage for air conditioning or heating, cooling a building. So ultimately, that's what that breaks down. That number is from. Stormwater. So your trees are intercepting about 1,916,000 gallons of water through rain, snow, just different precipitation events. And that provides around $51,926 in benefit. I like to say that trees are one of the best stormwater managers that exists. Yet they're one of the most underutilized stormwater managers out there today, sadly. So as you are probably aware, trees are great at catching and slowing the movement of precipitation as it's falling. And that creates a more natural, historical representation of what would have occurred during a storm event. And then your stormwater management system is not becoming as inundated, less flooding. Your trees are taking up a lot of that water. So overall, they do a great job at that. Air quality. So your trees are removing around 2,445 pounds of air pollution, just filtering the air and taking out pollutants. And that has a net value of around $6,754. Not as much of an impact financially, but health benefits wise, there is a pretty large impact and influence that trees have in the community. Carbon. So your trees sequester around 437,130 pounds of carbon every year with a value of around $3,000. And then your trees are storing 5,810,000 pounds of carbon, which is pretty incredible, with a value of around $43,577. And aesthetics. So this is one of my favorites that kind of gets overlooked a lot, but trees provide a lot of intrinsic value to communities. So there's those trees in cities that if suddenly they had to be taken down, people would be somehow emotionally or mentally impacted or influenced by that. So trees do provide a lot of social benefits, whether you recognize it while they're there or not. And overall, your city had $48,604 in social benefits. All right, so now we're going to get to the good stuff. So recommendations. So again, 90 trees recommended for removal. 16 of the 98 ash should be carefully examined. So these were just trees that we saw having signs or symptoms of stress that could have been related to an emerald ash borer infestation. Now, it's been a while, so I don't actually recall if I saw any exit holes or things like that, but there were 16 trees that were either poor or dead or dying that were ash trees from our management, from our tree inventory that I wanted to note just so you were aware. And those locations can be found either in the GIS link that the DNR sent to you, or also in some of the pictures at the end of the management plan. prune all trees. So I'll actually talk about this here in a second, but we do like to recommend that cities, if you don't have a rotational pruning program for your trees, all of your trees, to start developing one so that you're at least looking at and assessing to see if your trees need to be pruned at least every 2 to 3 years, or 3 to 4 years, just however you need to break it down. An increase in plant diversity among planted trees is always good. Some really good urban trees at the moment: Kentucky coffee tree, eastern redbud, tulip tree. Those are some really popular trees that people are planting right now. Visual survey of ash annually. So again, that's sort of what I talked about earlier, but just looking at your ash trees to make sure there isn't a problem, and being proactive and staying on top of that. And then, you know, without a budget, what we are instructed by the DNR to do is just estimate based off of a $2 per capita funding to remove trees. So that's how we formulate our estimates, which you'll see in the next page here. So because we don't necessarily have, or we weren't really necessarily given a tree budget, or maybe you guys don't have one, just specifically for trees, we just did the suggested budget of $2 per capita, which that's a really high number, and for a lot of communities is not doable. So I totally understand if that's not really accurate, but that's just an estimate based off of best management practice, around 37,000, which again is very high just for trees. So I'm not sure if you guys do have one, or if we just missed that, but overall, we're recommending, this is based off of those cost estimates, removing as many trees as you can every year to get on top of that. So in the first year, removing those really high priority critical concern trees, so those trees that we pointed out that needed removed that are over 24 inches in diameter, those are the ones you really want to be looking at first. Get rid of those, and then starting to replace those trees as you remove them. That's really important too. So again, in year 2, we're knocking down how many trees from the recommended removal list and then adding ash trees. So starting to examine your ash and any poor health, poor condition ash trees, start removing those ash trees as you can, just to be proactive and plan for the eventual loss, because it will happen. I'm actually from a town in Illinois, which had emerald ash borers come through about 8 years ago. And my community didn't think it was going to be a problem. And then finally it was. And so we had a lot of standing dead ash trees. So if it's not a problem now, that's awesome. But I like to encourage people to expect it to be a problem if you aren't already. And then you'll see that we put prune 1/3 of trees. So really just what that means is we're recommending that you break up your city either into quarters or thirds, and then every year you rotate which section you're pruning your trees in, or at least assessing to see if they need pruned. And that way you're looking at all of your trees in a rotation. Then in year 3, removing 45 ash trees and planting as many trees as you can. Those numbers, again, planting 41 trees, that's just based off of the dollar values to equal the 37,000. A good rule of thumb is for every 1 tree you plant, replace with 2. That way you're always ending with more than you started with. So in years 4 through 6, we're sort of seeing that same cycle where you're removing ash trees and planting more trees in their place. I don't like to focus on this 6-year plan as much. It is broken down again in the management plan as well. You can see it in more detail, just because these are estimates and they may not even meet the needs that you need now post derecho. But again, it's really important to kind of have a rotational prune and keep assessing those trees. So I think, yeah, this is just the last few slides just to kind of give you an idea, kind of zoomed in on where the locations of different trees are. So your ash trees are sort of spread out. throughout the city. So the green dots are the green ash, white dots are white ash, and then the red dots are just plain ash that weren't distinguishable, which is somewhat rare usually. That typically is from a past inventory that was done and just was kind of left like that. So there are a few in parks and a few along streets as well. So there's kind of a good mixture there. And basically all that tells me is there isn't one specific area with a lot of problems. It's sort of spread out. So that's good because you don't have one huge problem area that needs to be addressed immediately. So here, this map shows the location of poor condition trees. Again, it's sort of spread out. There are a few in parks there, and then there are several just planted along streets as well. So you can see the red dots are the dead or dying trees, or the yellow dots are the poor condition trees. And generally those were the trees that we recommended for removal. And then this last tree, our last map, is sort of chaos because there are lots of different points. But these are all the recommended recommendations for maintenance. So you can sort of see a lot of these trees are centrally located, and there are a few specifically congregated in parks that do need addressed, but overall still pretty spread out and no specific really bad area. So with that, that is all of the information I wanted to kind of go over. Do you guys have any questions?
So that was pretty cool presentation. I read the packet before the meeting and going through the detail work that you guys did. It definitely opens up a little bit of it kind of puts into perspective all the intangible I mean, I won't say intangible, but the resources that the city has that people don't really think about. But so most of this research was done on, I think you mentioned city properties and city trees only, right? Have you guys, is there like a possibility to kind of look at private trees, or kind of like the mixture of type of trees available within North Liberty? I know in your recommendation you want to have at least no more than 15% genre for a species, and 15% of a tree type.
Yep.
I don't know, Guy, if you have some kind of a data on how overall how North Liberty looks as far as tree mixture. I know we're a pretty young, I mean, a lot of young development, so we don't have mature trees except for the old North Liberty section, like the downtown area.
So that is a good question. We get that a lot. So we don't have any specific data that we collected that assesses the makeup of the private trees. So we only did public trees. But I will say, in a lot of new developments, and I'm pretty sure I remember this from my time there, a lot of new developers are solely using either Bradford or Callery pear or maple, some sort of variety of maple. That's what they're planting in their front yards. Sometimes crabapple, but it's going to be one of those three because they're cheap and easily accessible, and they can pop them right in the ground. And so if I had to guess, without even going back to North Liberty, that's what I would tell you is, especially in the new development area. I know that a lot of your town is newer builds. So that would probably be, just based off of my experience in other cities. I myself just live in a new development, and they had an autumn blaze maple planted in the front yard, along with all 10 of my neighbors on the same side of the street. So that's just what developers are doing right now. Do I like that? No, I think that's a terrible idea. Diversity is always great. First thing I did was pop it out and replace it with a red oak, but not everyone can do that. So that's just my thoughts on it. I don't know if any of you have actual comments on what's actually there now, but that's just what I've seen.
Well, one thing we can do as a city is we can look at the approval process through development and get it at the beginning with landscaping plans, take a look at what they propose to put in there. And if it is all maple or all crabapple, we can definitely make recommendations on we need to get a little more diverse in here so we don't end up with the same ash problem we have now or elm that we had in the past. So
Yeah, that's another really interesting point. So, kind of working at it at the beginning before the developers actually put those trees in the ground. I know a lot of cities have requirements for impervious surface and then having to plant so many trees for that mathematically. One thing that there's a city in the Quad Cities, I can't remember what city it is. They actually just adjusted their city ordinance to where they're not requiring those developers actually plant trees on those properties. Instead, they've created a fund where those developers just put that money that they would have spent on those trees into a fund that the city uses, that you are then freely able to plant trees on city property wherever you choose to put them. And then you are able to choose what species is being planted, or maybe you're even providing those trees to community members to then plant on their property. That has been a very successful method, but there are so many different ways you can do that. Like you said, you could just have a recommended list and sort of just catch them before they actually do that. And plant those trees. But that's something that I've seen that has worked pretty well, but there is quite a bit of work that has to be done in setting that up, both in the ordinance and then developers to agree to that. Sometimes it's great. It's less work for them, and definitely would be a benefit for you. But depends.
Thanks. Guy and Mike, do you know, I know I've used this program before. MidAmerican has the tree program that they hand out to residents every once in a while. I don't know if they do it every year or not. They have some specific type of trees that they kind of offer to residents who want to come and pick one up. Do you guys have any feedback? I mean, any input on what kind of trees they get to select, or that's kind of their own program that they run it and choose?
From past history, it is basically totally up to them what when they go out to bid to nurseries for their stock. We have to choose from that list of stock. So they're actually choosing it.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
I do want to make a comment on the emerald ash borer. We as a city, we have been treating all of our young ash trees for probably the last, I don't know, Brian, can you comment on this? Probably the last 4+ years.
Yeah, at least past 4 years.
Okay.
I want to introduce Brian. He's with my department and he oversees a lot of our forestry needs. So I thought I'd bring him on tonight.
Thanks. And so on some of Andrew's presentation, like the recommendation for pruning budget and stuff, do we have those kind of line items in our Park and Recs department, or is this, I mean, some of the recommendation is put to work, I guess, from the city standpoint or not?
We're correct. We do have a line item for tree maintenance, planting and removals. So we do have a budget and a line item for that. It's a very good idea about maybe concentrating on a third of the city at a time. It might help us get over them proficiently. So that is a great idea that maybe we might be able to implement in the future here, rather than just being more reactive and pruning when really needed.
And my last question is, so is this presentation that is provided through DNR like a binding presentation, or is it like an informational presentation to the city, and we can act on some of the recommendations that are given to us and makes us eligible for DNR funds or DNR grants or whatever?
I'm not sure about additional funds, but I'm definitely going to use this as a tool to, for one, have a tree inventory that spells out some areas that we need to concentrate on. It's definitely going to be a working document, but it's definitely it's going to be a great tool, and I really appreciate the DNR for providing this to us. So.
Yeah, and one last note I had on that, and just sort of like using it in the future, if you do have a lot of trees that you've removed or will remove in the next year, you can send those specific trees and the tree ID to Emma Hannigan, the DNR contact that's been in touch with you,
Yes.
in like an Excel sheet, and she will update your tree inventory to show that. She doesn't, what she told me is if you wanted to do that every year, you could, because this inventory is kind of a 6-year rotation right now, it's looking like. And there's a huge need right now. But she did say that if you were wanting to keep it updated and you had time to kind of go down the list and see what you've removed, then she would take that information and update the data for you.
So would she do any other data, like let's say we went through 1/3 of the town and pruned or crowned her trees, or is she looking at that kind of information that she'd provide? Input?
I would say not necessarily getting in the
Okay.
weeds that much, but more on if you have removed
Okay.
trees. That's mostly what it would be for. Because then if a contractor like me comes back in 6 years, and you've removed 500 trees and then have replaced with a bunch, that's just, it's a lot of change. And they ultimately, they like to track where cities are as far as progress. So I'm sure she would be happy to both see that and to help keep that updated.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Andrew today?
I might have a question. You mentioned the value in reducing stormwater. We have a lot of retention ponds, I know, to help manage stormwater. What is the value? You know, most of those are just filled with grass, and perhaps our professionals on here already know this answer, but what would be the value of adding trees in that particular area, either within the pond or surrounding? Is that something that would be beneficial?
Well, what we run into with that is a lot of volunteer trees, we'll call them, will come up in these areas that are unmaintained. And what that actually does is it may seem minuscule, but it will limit the capacity of these areas. So we actually recommend removal of all trees out of there. And also trees have a great benefit for it, but when it comes to direct bank stabilization of the wave action and water moving around, the roots we find aren't quite fine enough to hold that sediment where it needs to be, opposed to the grasses that will plant. You know, hopefully we get more native grasses in there that will really hold that soil where it needs to be a little better. So when they originally designed the stormwater basins, they have them to their certain specifications. And when you start adding the mass of woody debris in there, it actually takes away from those capacities. It may seem small, but over time that does add up quite a bit. So we try to keep the trees, unless it's actually designed and approved that way, we try to keep as many trees out of there as we can, just from that purpose.
Yeah, for special infrastructure like that, sometimes trees can be more of a nuisance than they can be a benefit. But like you said, there is specific infrastructure that's designed to hold trees and other plants that take up water. So it just depends on what you have, and the amount of time and staff and availability to keep that maintenance, which that's ultimately a lot of times what it comes down to as well.
Yeah, it is the maintenance. If we were design, most of our stormwater ponds are privately owned in North Liberty, and if we start allowing a bunch of trees in there and they become sick, dying, dead, you know, then it's up to homeowner associations or homeowners to remove, prune, or maintain these, which comes at a cost. And a lot of people aren't quite prepared or willing to fork out that money for it, and then it just continues to get worse and worse.
I trusted you guys had it all figured out, but I thought I'd get the inside scoop while I had y'all on here, so appreciate it.
All right. Any other questions for our guest speaker tonight?
I just want to say thank you, Andrew, for the report. I do feel that we have made some headway on a lot of your recommendations, because during your stay here last summer, it was right there during the derecho, and we've actually had to take care of a lot of these issues already. So
Yep.
a lot of these
Yeah.
issues, I'm sure, were caused by the derecho.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you for having me. I'm glad that we were able to do this, and I was able to give you guys some information. If you do have any questions, just feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to help answer any questions.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much for coming along.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next item on the agenda, I do have a quick question, Guy, about trees in the city. So I used to live in Coralville, moved to North Liberty. In Coralville, I had trees in my yard, and also there were trees between the sidewalk and the street, like the easement or the right of way.
Yeah.
Is that part of the city's maintenance area, or that's also a homeowner's responsibility?
Well, here in North Liberty, we have made it there. I think there's an ordinance that will not allow us or the residents to plant within that easement, just because we're from history, we're finding it water mains, any kind of utilities that they start to interfere with a lot of these utilities. And then when we have to come in there and fix these utilities, we have to tear a tree out. And of course, that's another expense that homeowner is going to want the tree put back in place. So we're recommending that we plant, that the homeowner plant trees on their side of the property, like on their side of the sidewalk.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, next item on the agenda is the MidAmerican Tree Please Grant 2021 update. Guy,
Yeah.
you have the floor.
Basically just, I know I reported on this last meeting, but we did receive $1,000 grant. That's going to go towards more trees at the dog park. However, I am going to hold off a little bit on planting out there. We're trying to get turf grass established. I don't want to have to track out there to get trees planted while we're trying to get turf grass planted. So it may be later on in the season before we plant trees out there.
Okay. Thank you. Next item would be the Tree City USA update.
Yes, I'm happy to report that the city of North Liberty has been designated a Tree City USA. It's recognition by meeting the program's 4 requirements, and that is have an established tree board or department, which we have, a tree care ordinance, which we have an ordinance, an annual community forestry budget of at least $2 per capita, which was mentioned earlier. I can say that we do spend $12.68 per capita yearly. So we're well above the $2 per capita. And then we also have to have an Arbor Day observation and proclamation. So that's coming up on April 30th, the Arbor Day and proclamation.
The Muddy Creek cleanup, fun time last weekend.
Yes, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there, but Brian was. Brian was not there. I'm sorry. But I did have some employees there. Anyway, it started out nice, and then it started to rain. And
It got real bad.
yeah, so what I've heard, they made great progress from Penn Street down to Zeller Street. They picked up a lot of trash. I just want to say thank you to all the volunteer people, the Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, and everyone that was out there helping out that day. Every little bit helps. I'm sure we're going to have a little more cleanup to happen, but we always do have a few more groups that, call me and ask if they can have some sort of service project, and I'll probably take them from Zeller Street on down to the south, maybe, and start picking up more stuff.
Okay.
So, but anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody that did help out on that rainy day.
Yes. Quick question on that front. How do we go about advertising that event a little bit more? I mean, I've heard about it in our board meeting and also through the email that you sent out, but just probing people around town, like nobody really knew this thing was coming up. So I tried to reach out to Sugar Bottom Bikes, since they have bikers there, to see if they would post this on their Facebook page and see. I think they have their own club of bikers, kind of share there and see if we would get any people coming along. And but apparently nobody. Most people that I saw at the cleanup was mostly families and probably the Boy Scout I think Kevin, were you there? I think I saw you there too, right?
Yeah, I was there.
Okay. But yeah, it was good to see the community come out and get involved, but trying to find a way to maybe open it up a little bit to get more people, more hands in there,
Right.
like you said. So
Well, I'm sure the weather didn't help matters, but I do rely on our communications department to get out the word. They have access to social media for the city, and I know that they try to spread the word that way.
okay. All right.
Yeah, and that, I guess to add on that a little bit, that social media reaches more people than you'd think. We use that through the grant advertisement that we used last year, and it reached a majority of the city. We got great feedback from just what our communications department pushes out through Facebook and Twitter and all the other kid stuff. And so a lot of people do see that. And I think, like what Guy said, the weather Saturday, I think was kind of scaring some people, but
yeah.
And it's always hard to have a rain date for this because it seems like every weekend from here on out is busy for us. There's always something going on right this time of year. And we always try to catch this cleanup prior to the vegetation getting so tall that we actually can't see the trash and to pull it out. So this is about the only time we can actually get in there and get it done. So rain or shine, minus lightning, of course, but we have it.
Okay. Thanks for that update. Next item is the Arbor Day proclamation, and Arbor Day coming up soon. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I just want to mention again that the North Liberty Arbor Day is to be celebrated on April 30th this year. We just promote people to go out and purchase trees from their local businesses and plant trees in the city. So every tree is a benefit to the city.
Thank you. Stormwater updates.
yep, I can just go through these quick.
All right.
We're starting the second phase. We had the grant program 2 years ago to help with a marketing campaign to push the soil quality restoration. We were awarded a second phase of that, which is the same type of parameters, a marketing campaign. Only this one is focused on all infiltration practices, basically anything that I'll give grant money out for. Rain gardens, bioswales, anything to help keep the water on your property. So we just started that with a new company based out of Dubuque, McCullough Engineering. They seem to be doing a really good job. They've hit the ground running. We're just kind of bouncing ideas back and forth right now, coming up with, a whole new ad campaign, new logo and everything. We're pretty excited about what they're going to give to us, and I can update it when I get more next meeting probably. But I think it's going to be a good deal. I believe it was another $50,000 they gave us to have a company pretty much develop a whole marketing campaign to get this out to the public. And that's with Coralville and Iowa City and North Liberty. We're all in this together. So that's going to be pretty exciting. The spring applications from spring and fall of this fiscal year, we've pretty much lined up to give out more grant dollars for soil quality restoration. I had a couple rain gardens in there also. I don't think that the city's handed out this much money before. It's good. We're getting close to our maximum and me running out of money for that, which is what I like to see. It means more people are doing this and getting involved. So that's a good thing. I hope that keeps going. I hope I almost run out of money every year doing that, just because we'll get more projects done. And then the last thing is just kind of a heads up. We're going to be doing a little bit of brush clearing, tree clearing in some of our drainage ways. Along Muddy Creek, we're going to start on Penn Street where the cleanup started. Just north of Penn, there's a bunch of growth in there we need to get cleaned out to help the water move in. And hopefully we'll move to the south of Penn a little bit where a majority of all that trash was collected. We're going to try to get that cleaned up a bit as well. And then a couple other areas in town. So if you see city crews out there cutting trees down, that's probably what we're doing. Not the big trees that guy's dealing with, but smaller stuff in the drainage ways. I think that's about all I have for this quarter. If you have any questions for me.
Yeah, I have a quick question on SQR. I used it a few years ago when we first moved into to our house here in North Liberty. Is there like a requirement for developers when they build a house? Usually they'll come and take the topsoil off, build a house, bring some topsoil back on, and then put the sod on top. Is there a requirement on how thick that topsoil needs to be before the sod is laid down, so that we don't have to go? In my ground here, I've been here for almost 8 years, and I think I can still go to spots and pick up the carpet and see the clay underneath. So I went to the SQR. It helped out a little bit, but I think if we have something like, at the beginning of a development, have some requirement of developers putting a certain amount of topsoil before they put the sod down, so we can get better grip or better, sod retention, I guess. That would probably help out with the SQR.
Yeah, we do now. Unfortunately, you're in the Westlake area, I believe, right?
Yep,
I think that was pre our current regulation.
Okay.
The regulation now is a developer will come in and they will strip all the topsoil off and they'll stockpile it on site. It cannot leave that actual permitted site.
Okay.
They'll put in their streets, all their infrastructure, and then they have to redistribute all of that topsoil throughout the entire development before the city will give acceptance for that development. And then when it comes to the individual home builder, they will then strip that topsoil again, but they have to keep it on that individual lot. It cannot leave the lot.
Okay.
And then that will have to be redistributed. So it's kind of a roundabout way of saying they have to replace the topsoil that was there.
Okay.
But we don't allow, before when like Westlake was developed, they would strip that topsoil and they would sell it off and they would truck it to wherever. Okay. We don't allow that anymore, cannot leave this site. So that's about the best we can get at the moment.
All right, that's good to know. That's something at least to keep the rich soil that we have and hopefully help with tree growth and grass growth and all the beautiful stuff. So
yeah, and I also encourage the SQR can also be done for people that build their own homes, buy a home that's being built. That's a great time to do that as well before they put the sod down. They can come in and treat that area with the compost and everything before the sod is even laid. So that's another thing that I would love to push out to people that are having homes built as well.
And SQR is only one time per owner, or is there like a sunset period after 5 years? You can apply for it. Oh, per year. Okay.
Yep, I would help you out every single year because the more you do it, the better it's going to get. So
got it. Okay, that's good to know. All right. Any other questions or comments from the board for Mike about the stormwater updates? Nope. All right. Old business. Any updates from last meeting that we need to address?
None noted on my end.
All right. New business. I guess we don't have a full board, so it's more of an information today than. Okay. Well, item number 12, adjournment. So our next meeting is scheduled for July 14th at 7 p.m. So we'll, if there's no comments or comments, I guess we'll go ahead and adjourn. I need a motion. Should we motion or we just adjourn?
It's just an informational meeting tonight.
Okay. All right.
So we're good.
Kevin, any questions?
No, I'm good. I think it's a pretty informational meeting. It was a good one.
Yeah,
Yep,
I agree.
thank you.
That was pretty good. All right.
yep,
Thank you,
thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mike. And thanks, Guy.
Yep.